I played a new game this week and it gave me a feeling I haven't had in quite a while. I'd like to talk to you about Elephantasy, and more importantly, the upcoming sequel, Elephantasy Flipside. Elephantasy is a game I purchased myself, while Flipside, which releases tomorrow, February 28th, was provided to me by developer Benjamin Linker Maxim. It's worth noting that all of the opinions I express in this video are my own. When I was a child, I remember playing Wario Land 1993 for the first time, a game with the subtitle Super Mario Land 3, which didn't quite fit. It had this really unique feeling to it, somewhat surreal. It was like Mario, of course, kind of, but the world felt more alive, less like a staged out level. You could go from one screen back to the other and explore, finding secrets or taking a key from one area to a hidden door to find treasure. Fast forward to the year 2000 and Wario Land 3 comes out for the Game Boy Color. It ditched the notion of lives and deaths back in Wario Land 2 and leaned into the puzzle elements. You still had separate stages, but they were less linear. Wario also had a different interaction with most of the enemies, giving him what you may describe as a temporary power-up, which would then be used to navigate some of that stage's puzzles. You didn't really get a game over, you just explored. You looked for colored keys and their corresponding treasure chests. Wario is a treasure hunter after all. In 2001, Wario Land 4 came out. It had faster gameplay, escape sequences and such. I didn't play it, though I have played Pizza Tower, a game that came out last month and is heavily inspired by the series. People have been talking about Pizza Tower ever since as this wonderful return to form for the missing franchise. While I agree it does hit some of those classic notes, I don't think it quite achieves what Elephantasy does, though it's worth noting they have opposite visions in mind. Elephantasy manages to tap into this surreal, sleepy dream world feeling in the same way as Wario Land 3. Not to mention the fact that Belle, the main character, is sucked into a miniature world not unlike how Wario is sucked into the music box. The game is a bit claustrophobic visually, if you really focus on it, but to play it doesn't give you that feeling. Instead, coupled with the frequent lack of music, it feels vast and lonely, the solid black background seeming endlessly deep. In the beginning of the game, you meet the local wizard, Snorri, and they offer you a deal. Bring back gems and you can rent useful items, like in the Legend of Zelda game A Link Between Worlds. This isn't the first time we'll bring up Zelda either. These items work as power-ups. The more gems you've brought back, the more you can carry at a time. And thus, the world opens up. Slowly. Maybe you pass through an area that needs the boots to cross gaps and the ring to lift pots out of the way. Perhaps you fall down a pit and find a small ledge you can't reach, knowing you need the seeds to climb up to it. There's no pressure, there's no time limit. The game moves at a slow pace. It's comfortable with its loneliness. Sure, there are characters to talk to, quite a few in fact, but it still has this overwhelming feeling that you are out there on your own. There isn't any inherent danger to the world. Elephantasy Flipside builds on this formula. It even contains a retro-style instruction manual as a nod to the games it draws inspiration from. The Legend of Zelda comparison must seem pretty obvious now, as we're in a 3D isometric world instead of a 2D platformer. There are now 8 different items for you to use, and instead of renting them from a shopkeeper, you borrow them from Death himself. The first time I ended up down here, in the inversion, I thought I would have to fight the imps, but instead they simply had conversations with me. It's very similar to the original in most other ways, just improved. I'd say that the original Legend of Zelda is the closest comparison to this. There were plenty of characters to talk to, sure, but it never quite shook that loneliness, did it? Setting out to discover the different dungeons, all the little mysteries, cryptic riddles someone might tell you that reveals a secret all the way across the world. Games don't really feel like that to me anymore. Truly, there's something to be said for staring out from the top of a mountain and seeing the entire world, but when you can see the entire world all at once, something's gone. Give me claustrophobia. Give me small sections of the world I have to stitch together in my mind. give me the ability to once again get lost. Every screen of the game feels like a liminal space. Transitory. It's just big enough that you can explore it, but just small enough that you feel like you're in a hallway, like you don't quite have the full picture. It isn't unnerving in the way that many people present liminal space, but comforting, again, nostalgic. It's sitting in the dark under the covers as a kid playing a game when you should be sleeping. It's finding mysteries on each new screen and being encouraged to do so. The first time I fell into water holding a snowball, I sunk and I kept sinking, seeing an area that I didn't know existed and realizing that these areas are under the entire ocean. After learning I could do this, I used the same mechanic to get under a waterfall, which I followed up to a mountain pond. I'm not sure I was supposed to get here, because I couldn't find a way back out, but it was exciting all the same. I know I've talked about this game more as a feeling, more as art, than I have in actual gameplay terms. I think that's because it evoked a feeling in me that I haven't quite felt in a while, even as someone who primarily plays indie games. It isn't corporate, it isn't overwhelming. It feels like the first time you stumbled upon Cave Story and you downloaded it and wondered how a game with that much love and care could possibly exist in a space its own, on some corner of the internet. Elephantasy and Elephantasy Flipside embody that same pure love for video games, not as a product to sell and make money, but as a form of art to experience. If you're interested in experiencing Elephantasy and Elephantasy Flipside, there are links to the game's Steam and itch.io pages below. The games are both $9.99 each, but Flipside has a 10% off launch sale. I highly recommend playing these games and supporting Linker. If you absolutely fall in love with them like I have, Linker has several other games as well. I haven't had an opportunity to play them yet, but I'm going to. I hope this game stirs the same tired feelings in you that it did in me. And I will see you next time.